winds that swept through the streets of Babylon carried a chill that felt out of place in the usually warm and bustling city. The great ziggurats and towering walls that had withstood the might of empires now stood under a sky heavy with clouds, as if the heavens themselves were in mourning. A somber quiet had settled over the city, a silence so deep that it seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the inevitable. In the heart of Babylon, within the vast and ornately decorated palace, King Nabonidus lay on a bed of woven silks, his once vibrant form reduced to a frail shadow by the relentless advance of age and illness. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by the glassy sheen of impending death. The palace was filled with the scent of incense, a futile attempt to mask the unmistakable odor of decay that clung to the dying king. Nabonidus, the king who had defied Cyrus the Great and defended Babylon from the might of the Persian Empire, now faced an enemy that no sword could defeat. He had fought valiantly against the forces that sought to conquer his city, had withstood the pressures of war and politics, but in the end, it was time that had brought him to his knees. The king's breath came in shallow, rasping gasps, each one a struggle against the darkness that threatened to engulf him. Beside him, Belshazzar knelt, her face streaked with tears. The princess, who had always been a pillar of strength, now found herself crumbling under the weight of her father's impending death. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her shoulders, framing a face that was a mirror of both beauty and sorrow. Her eyes, once bright with defiance and determination, were now dull with grief as she watched the life slip away from the man who had raised her, who had protected Babylon with every ounce of his strength. Standing a few paces away, Ira watched the scene with a heavy heart. The man who had once been a simple shepherd, who had been thrust into a world of gods and kings, now found himself facing the reality of mortality in a way he had never imagined. The Blazefrost celestial sword, which had once been a symbol of his power, now seemed to weigh heavier at his side. The cold that had once been his weapon now felt like a chill in his soul as he watched the slow, agonizing decline of the king he had come to respect. The room was dimly lit, the flickering flames of oil lamps casting long shadows that danced along the walls like specters. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, mingling with the oppressive atmosphere of impending loss. The courtiers and advisors had long since been dismissed, leaving only the three of them, Nabonidus, Belshazzar, and Ira, to witness the final moments of the king's life. Nabonidus stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon his daughter. A faint smile touched his lips, a ghost of the man he had once been. "Belshazzar," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Come closer, my child." Belshazzar leaned forward, her hand gently taking her father's. The warmth of her touch was a stark contrast to the cold that had seeped into his bones, a final connection between life and death. "I am here, father," she replied, her voice breaking with the effort to hold back her tears. "I am with you." Nabonidus's gaze shifted to Ira, standing silently in the shadows. "And you, Ira," the king said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "Come closer, my son." Ira hesitated for a moment, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. He stepped forward, moving to stand beside Belshazzar, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as if seeking comfort in its cold, familiar presence. Nabonidus looked at them both, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. He had seen much in his life, war, peace, triumph, and defeat, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The knowledge that he would leave behind a world that was still so fragile, that he would not be there to guide his daughter or protect his people, weighed heavily on his soul. "My children," Nabonidus began, his voice trembling with emotion. "I have fought many battles, faced many foes, but none as relentless as the passage of time. My body grows weak, and I know that my time in this world is coming to an end." Belshazzar shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "No, father, please, don't speak like this. You are strong, you will recover. We will find a way." But Nabonidus only smiled, a sad, knowing smile that spoke of a man who had seen too much of the world to believe in false hope. "My dear, there are some battles that even kings cannot win. It is the way of life, the way of the world. And now, it is time for me to pass on the crown, to ensure that Babylon remains strong, even after I am gone." He paused, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he gathered the strength to continue. "Ira," he said, turning his gaze to the man who had become his trusted ally, "you have been a protector of this city, a guardian of its people. You have fought bravely, with honor and courage. And now, I ask you to take on a new role." Ira frowned, uncertain of what Nabonidus meant. "My king," he began, his voice low and steady, "I have always served Babylon, and I will continue to do so as long as I draw breath. But I am not a king, I am only a man." Nabonidus shook his head weakly, a faint smile still playing on his lips. "No, Ira, you are more than that. You are the one who will lead Babylon into the future. I wish for you to take the throne, to become the king that this city needs." Ira's heart skipped a beat, the weight of the words pressing down on him like a physical force. He had never aspired to be a king, had never sought power or glory. His life had been one of duty, of protecting the weak, of wielding the power that had been given to him by forces beyond his understanding. But now, faced with the dying wish of a king, he could not refuse. "Father, no," Belshazzar whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Ira, he cannot be king. He is not of royal blood." Nabonidus's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter. "My dear, royalty is not just about blood, it is about the heart, the spirit. Ira has shown time and again that he has the heart of a king, the spirit of a leader. He has defended Babylon, just as I have, and I trust him to continue to do so." He paused, his eyes flickering with a final surge of determination. "But there is one more thing I ask of you both, a wish that I hope you will honor." Belshazzar looked at her father through tear-filled eyes, her heart breaking at the sight of him so frail, so vulnerable. "Anything, father. We will do whatever you ask." Nabonidus reached out, taking both Ira's hand and Belshazzar's, his fingers trembling with the effort. "I wish for you to come together, in marriage." The words hung in the air, a solemn request that carried the weight of a dying man's final wish. Belshazzar felt her heart clench, a mixture of emotions swirling within her, grief, fear, uncertainty. She had always respected Ira, had admired his strength and courage, but the thought of marriage had never crossed her mind. She had dedicated her life to the gods, to the service of her people, and now, to be asked to share that life with another, it was overwhelming. Ira, too, was taken aback by the request. He had never imagined himself as a husband, let alone a king. His life had been one of solitude, of duty. But now, looking into the eyes of the woman he had come to care for, and seeing the pain in her expression, he felt a stirring of something deeper, something that he had long buried beneath the coldness of his power. "Belshazzar," Ira began, his voice hesitant, "I do not wish to impose upon you. I know that you have your own path, your own desires. But if it is your father's wish, I will honor it." Belshazzar's tears flowed freely now, her heart torn between duty and her own desires. She looked at her father, who had given so much for his people, and then at Ira, who had become a symbol of hope for Babylon. She knew that her father's wish was not just for her, but for the future of the city, for the stability and protection that Ira could provide. With a trembling hand, she reached out to take Ira's hand in hers, a gesture of acceptance, of trust. "Ira," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I will honor my father's wish. I will marry you." Nabonidus's eyes filled with tears of relief and satisfaction as he saw the two hands joined together. He had done all that he could, had secured the future of Babylon as best as he knew how. Now, with his daughter and Ira together, he could finally let go, knowing that the city he loved would be in safe hands. "Thank you," Nabonidus whispered, his voice barely audible now. "You have made an old man very happy." His grip on their hands loosened as his strength began to fade. His breaths became shallower, each one a struggle against the encroaching darkness. But there was no fear in his eyes, no regret, only peace. "Ira," Nabonidus said, his voice a mere whisper, "take care of my daughter, and of Babylon. They are both in your hands now." Ira nodded, his heart heavy with the responsibility that had been placed upon him. "I swear it, my king," he replied, his voice filled with resolve. "I will protect them with my life." Nabonidus' eyes drifted shut, his body relaxing as he surrendered to the inevitable. A faint smile remained on his lips as he breathed his last, his soul departing from the mortal world to join the gods in the afterlife. Bel-Shaltinana let out a choked sob as her father's hand slipped from hers, his body now still, lifeless. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Ira, too, felt the weight of the loss, but he knew that there was no time to mourn, no time to dwell on the past. The future of Babylon now rested on his shoulders, and he could not afford to falter. The people of Babylon mourned the passing of their king with great lamentation. For days, the city was filled with the sounds of wailing, of drums beating a slow, mournful rhythm as the citizens paid their respects to the man who had led them through 4 great wars, who had stood defiant against the might of Cyrus the Great. The streets were lined with mourners, their heads bowed in grief as they watched the funeral procession make its way through the city. Nabonidus was laid to rest in a tomb befitting a king, his body adorned with the symbols of his reign, his legacy etched into the very walls of the chamber. The tomb was sealed, marking the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new one. The reign of King Ira. With the death of Nabonidus, Ira was crowned as the new king of Babylon, a title that he accepted with both humility and determination. The coronation was a solemn affair, held in the grand ziggurat that stood at the center of the city. The people of Babylon gathered in silence, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and hope as they watched Ira ascend the steps to the throne. Ira stood before the gathered assembly, his expression serious, his heart heavy with the responsibility that had been placed upon him. He wore the royal robes of Babylon, the crown of the kings who had come before him resting heavily upon his brow. The Blazefrost celestial sword, a symbol of his power, hung at his side, its cold presence a constant reminder of the forces that had shaped his life. As the high priest placed the crown upon his head, Ira felt the weight of the world settle upon his shoulders. He was no longer just a protector, no longer just a warrior. He was a king, the ruler of a city that had seen more than its share of war and strife. And it was his duty to ensure that the legacy of Nabonidus was honored, that the people of Babylon were safe. The cheers of the crowd were muted, a subdued acknowledgement of the new king, a reflection of the uncertainty that still lingered in the hearts of the people. They had lost a great king, a man who had led them through some of the darkest days in their history. And now, they looked to Ira, a man who had come from the shadows, to lead them into the future. The wedding in shadow. The sun, a great, burning eye in the sky, began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a blood-red glow over the ancient city of Babylon. The walls, once battered by the forces of Cyrus the Great, now stood tall and resolute, a symbol of endurance amidst the endless turmoil of the world. The Euphrates River, winding its way through the heart of the city, glittered like molten gold under the dying light, while the shadows lengthened, stretching their fingers across the streets and alleys. Babylon was alive with activity. The city hummed with the sound of celebration, a stark contrast to the dark undertones that had plagued it for years. People gathered in the streets, their faces lit with joy and anticipation, as they prepared for the wedding of their new king, Ira, to the beloved princess Bel-Shaltinana. The air was thick with the scent of incense and flowers, mingling with the sounds of drums and flutes that filled the evening with a sense of festivity. But within the grand palace, where the walls were adorned with tapestries depicting the great battles of Babylon's past, the atmosphere was markedly different. The halls were quieter than usual, the laughter and music outside muted, as if the stone walls themselves absorbed the sounds, leaving only a faint echo of the celebration within. Ira stood before a polished bronze mirror, his reflection staring back at him with an expression of calm resignation. He was dressed in the traditional robes of a Babylonian king, the deep blues and golds of the fabric shimmering in the dim light of the chamber. The Blazefrost celestial sword hung at his side, its cold, unyielding presence a reminder of the battles he had fought and the responsibilities that now weighed heavily upon him. He adjusted the circlet on his brow, the metal cool against his skin, and took a deep breath. Tonight, he would marry Bel-Shaltinana, the woman who had been a beacon of light in his otherwise solitary existence. But even as he prepared himself for the ceremony, a part of him knew that this union would not bring the happiness that the people of Babylon hoped for. Belshazzar, the beautiful and enigmatic princess, had always been devoted to the gods, her heart firmly rooted in her role as a priestess. Though she had agreed to marry Ira, fulfilling her father's dying wish, her love for the divine remained unwavering. It was a love that left little room for anything else, even for a man who had fought for her, who had stood by her side through the darkest of times. As Ira made his way to the grand hall where the wedding would take place, the heavy doors opened before him, revealing the vast chamber beyond. The hall was adorned with golden candelabras, their flames flickering softly in the evening light, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The stone floor was strewn with petals of lotus and jasmine, their delicate fragrance filling the air, mingling with the heady scent of myrrh that hung over the room like a mist. The people of Babylon, nobility and commoners alike, had gathered to witness the union of their king and princess. They stood in silence as Ira entered, their gazes following him with a mixture of reverence and awe. The weight of their expectations pressed down on him like an iron mantle, but Ira bore it with the same stoic determination that had carried him through every battle, every trial. At the far end of the hall, Belshazzar stood waiting, her figure draped in robes of pure white, the fabric shimmering with a life of its own. A veil of fine silk covered her face, giving her an ethereal, almost otherworldly appearance, as if she were more spirit than flesh. The high priest, an elderly man with a long white beard, stood beside her, his expression solemn as he prepared to conduct the ceremony. As Ira approached, Belshazzar lifted her veil, revealing the face that had captivated the hearts of many in Babylon. Her eyes, dark and deep as the night sky, met Ira's with a calm, unreadable expression. There was no joy in her gaze, no anticipation, only a serene acceptance of the duty she was about to fulfill. Ira's heart ached as he looked at her, knowing that despite the vows they were about to exchange, the distance between them would remain. She was a woman of the gods, her heart and soul bound to a higher calling, one that he could never truly be a part of. And though he had long accepted this reality, the pain of it was no less sharp. The ceremony began, the high priest's voice echoing through the chamber as he invoked the blessings of the gods. He spoke of unity, of love and devotion, his words heavy with the weight of tradition and expectation. But to Ira, they felt hollow, like echoes of a distant past that no longer held meaning for him. As the priest recited the ancient incantations, Ira glanced at Belshazzar, searching her face for any sign of emotion, any hint of what she might be feeling. But her expression remained calm, composed, her eyes focused on the altar before them, where the sacred flame burned brightly, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. When the time came for them to exchange vows, Ira took Belshazzar's hand in his, the warmth of her skin a stark contrast to the coldness he felt within. He spoke his vows with sincerity, promising to protect her, to stand by her side as long as he lived. But even as he said the words, he knew that they were just that, words. For Belshazzar's heart belonged to the gods, and no vow could change that. When it was Belshazzar's turn, she spoke her vows with the same calm composure, her voice steady and clear. She promised to honor Ira, to fulfill the duties of a wife and queen, but there was no warmth in her words, no passion. It was as if she were reciting a prayer, a duty to be fulfilled, rather than a commitment of the heart. The ceremony concluded with the binding of their hands, a symbolic gesture meant to signify their union. But as the priest wrapped the silk cord around their wrists, Ira could not shake the feeling that this was not a binding of two souls, but rather a binding of duty, of obligation. The people of Babylon erupted in cheers as the ceremony came to an end, their voices rising in a chorus of celebration that echoed through the hall and out into the streets beyond. To them, this was a day of great joy, a moment of triumph, the union of their king and princess, a symbol of hope for the future. But for Ira, the moment was bittersweet. He knew that his marriage to Belshazzar would be a union in name only, a bond forged by duty rather than love. And though he had accepted this long ago, it did not lessen the sting. The return to the temple. After the ceremony, the grand hall was filled with revelry as the people of Babylon celebrated the marriage of their king. The sound of music and laughter echoed through the palace, the atmosphere charged with the excitement of new beginnings. Tables were laden with rich foods and fine wines, and the guests toasted the health of the newlyweds, their glasses raised in honor of the union. But amidst the celebration, Belshazzar remained distant, her expression serene but detached, as if she were merely an observer rather than a participant in the festivities. She exchanged polite words with the guests, her smile never reaching her eyes, and when she spoke to Ira, it was with the same calm composure that she had shown throughout the ceremony. As the night wore on, Ira noticed Belshazzar's gaze drifting toward the large windows that overlooked the temple district of Babylon. The temple, where she had served as a priestess, stood in the distance, its silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of torchlight. It was a place she had always considered her true home, a sanctuary where she could commune with the gods, where she could find solace in her faith. Ira could see the longing in her eyes, the quiet yearning to return to that sacred place. He knew that despite the vows they had exchanged, her heart was not truly with him, but with the gods she served. And though he had known this from the beginning, it did not make it any easier to accept. As the night drew to a close, Belshazzar turned to Ira, her voice gentle but firm. "Ira," she said, her gaze meeting his with quiet resolve, "there is something I must do." Ira nodded, already knowing what she was about to say. "You wish to return to the temple?" Belshazzar's expression softened, a trace of sadness flickering in her eyes. "I promised my father that I would marry you, and I have fulfilled that promise. But he did not ask me to live with you, to forsake my duties as a priestess. My heart belongs to the gods, Ira. I cannot stay here." Ira felt a pang of sorrow at her words, but he knew that he could not keep her from the life she had chosen. He had always respected her devotion, had admired the strength of her faith, and he knew that to ask her to stay would be to ask her to give up a part of herself. "Then go," Ira said softly, his voice tinged with sadness. "I will not stand in your way. But know that you will always have a place here, with me, should you ever wish to return." Belshazzar smiled, a small, wistful smile that spoke of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you, Ira. I am truly grateful for your understanding." She leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek, a gesture of affection and farewell. And then, without another word, she turned and made her way toward the palace doors, her white robes flowing behind her like a ghostly apparition. Ira watched as she disappeared into the morning mist, the faint light of dawn casting a pale glow over the city. As the doors closed behind her, Ira felt a deep emptiness settle in his chest, a hollow ache that echoed through his very soul. He had known that this marriage would not be like others, had known that Belshazzar's love for the gods would always come before anything else. But knowing did not make it easier to bear. He stood alone in the grand hall, the sounds of celebration fading into the background as the reality of his situation sank in. He was a king, a protector, a guardian of Babylon, but he was also alone. The woman he had married, the woman who had promised to stand by his side, had chosen to leave, to return to the life she had always known. This, Ira realized, was the price of being a hero. The path he had chosen, the power he wielded, had set him apart from others, had isolated him in a way that few could understand. He had been given great strength, great responsibility, but in return, he had been forced to sacrifice the simple joys that others took for granted. He would rule Babylon with wisdom and strength, just as he had vowed. He would protect its people, just as he had always done. But he would do so alone, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the woman he loved would never truly be his. The wedding that had been meant to symbolize hope and unity had instead become a reminder of the loneliness that came with power. And as Ira stood in the fading light of dawn, he knew that this was a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. For Belshazzar had returned to the temple, to the gods she loved, and Ira was left to rule Babylon alone.